Hi guys, so here's my anatomy project. I'm going to separate the head and the body so it's easier to show everything. But I only drew the left hemisphere of the brain to leave room for other things on the other side. But the left and right hemispheres would be separated by this longitudinal fissure all the way down through the cerebellum. And then, so here is the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the frontal and parietal are separated by this central sulcus. In front of the central sulcus is this precentral gyrus, and then behind it in the parietal lobe is the postcentral gyrus, right here in orange. And then down here is the temporal lobe, and the sylvian fissure kind of separates that out. Back here is the occipital lobe, and then the cerebellum is down below. The insular lobe I tried to draw with dashed lines to show that it should be more medial, but I didn't want to cut the brain, or cut my head in half, so the dashed lines show that. And then the B is for Broca's area, the W is for Wernicke's. For the brainstem, I have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla right here. I also decided to go ahead and write out all of the cranial nerves and color code them, and I also wrote if they were sensory, motor, or both, because I can never remember and this will be a good reference for me. So on all of the muscles, I wrote the cranial nerve number in the color that I gave it down here. So this first muscle is the orbicularis oris around the lips, and the mentalis is right here. Over here is the temporalis, the buccinator, the masseter, buccinator, and then masseter. Then I have the posterior belly of the digastric going to the anterior belly right here. And then here is the mylohyoid, and then the geniohyoid going this way. And then this big one running all the way down is the platysma, and I wrote that right here. It's really hard to see that gray writing, but that's the platysma. And then here is the hyoid bone, the epiglottis right here, the thyroid cartilage to the cricoid cartilage, and then that goes to the trachea. And I did draw the esophagus in dashed lines behind the trachea so I can remember that it's right behind it. And then here is more of the trachea. So obviously the lungs and the ribs and the pectoral girdle would be bilateral, and the diaphragm would also extend out, but I just drew part of it to make it easier to see everything. So here's the trachea going to the lung, and then the diaphragm is underneath. Then we have the pectoral girdle, which is the clavicle and the scapula. Then I have the sternum, so the manubrium, the body, and then the xiphoid process right here. Okay, and then here are the ribs. So 1 through 7 are the true ribs, 8 through 10 are false ribs, and 11 and 12 are floating ribs. And those would go behind the stomach, kind of encasing it, but you couldn't really see them unless I drew them on top, so that's why I did that. Here is the stomach, and the esophagus would connect to the stomach. And then here is the heart. And if you can see this like blue line coming down and going back up, that wraps around the aorta. It's the recurrent laryngeal nerve. It's part of the vagus. So that would come back up here and innervate the larynx. You can see those lines. So that's cranial nerve 10, the vagus. And the vagus is also in charge of those involuntary, really important functions like heart and lungs. So it controls all of those things. And then cranial nerve 12, the hypoglossal, that innervates the tongue. And then cranial nerve 5 is the trigeminal, so that is sensation of the face. And then it also innervates the jaw, so those muscles of mastication. And over here, I drew cranial nerve 7, so that innervates muscles for facial expression and also carries sensory information like taste from the interior portion of the tongue. So then going to the back, I have the cervical vertebrae right here, 1 through 7, and then the thoracic, 1 through 12. It's like folded over. But 1 through 12, and then the lumbar vertebrae and the sacrum, and then the coccyx is right below. Here is the pelvic girdle and the ilium. So I really enjoyed this project. I think I got a lot out of it. I think what will help me the most is seeing like the muscles and where they kind of fall and what they're innervated by. It was really helpful for me to kind of draw where the cranial nerves would like branch out to, because that's something that's hard for me to visualize. So having this right here I think will be a good reference for me. I also think it will be really nice to have with patients, so we can kind of like show where exactly we're talking about, because sometimes I think that information can be hard to describe. So I think having this as a tool will be really helpful in the future. So I'm happy we did this, and thanks for watching.